The moment my brother Caleb handed me his phone, I felt an inexplicable chill settle in the pit of my stomach. "Could you check something for me? I think Jess might be hiding something," he said, his voice barely tinged with uncertainty. Jess had been Caleb's girlfriend for just over a year, and while I had always found her charming and intelligent, there was an underlying tension that seemed to cling to her whenever I was around. It was as if she had constructed an elaborate house of cards in her life, and I was about to be the wind that brought it all crashing down. I sat down on the couch, the familiar scent of fresh coffee and the faint sound of rain tapping against the windows creating a warm cocoon around me, but the gravity of the situation pulled my focus. I opened Caleb's messages, hoping to find some innocent indication of Jess's newfound secret instead of finding any wrongdoing. As I scrolled through conversations filled with typical banter, one unfamiliar name caught my attention. It belonged to a Casey, someone who seemed to take up an unexpected amount of Jess's time, nights spent studying together, late-night texts that were anything but casual. An uneasy feeling settled over me. The more I read, the more a picture of deceit began to form. I felt torn. Jess had always treated me kindly, had welcomed me into their shared world like a sister, yet here I was, caught in the web of someone else's potential infidelity. When Caleb's voice broke through my thoughts, asking what I found, all I could manage was a half-hearted shrug. "Nothing, just some study group." But the unease lingered. Over the following days, I found myself looking at Jess through a different lens, noticing the small signs that now seemed glaring, her constant checks of her phone even when she was with Caleb, the way she smiled a little too brightly whenever someone else mentioned Casey. One rainy afternoon, I couldn't contain my curiosity any longer. When Jess called me for a casual lunch, I found the courage to broach the subject in a light-hearted way, hoping to gauge her reaction without being accusatory. "So, how's your study group with Casey going?" I asked, letting the words hang in the air. For a moment, she froze, a fleeting shadow of panic crossing her features before her smile swiftly returned, though the tightness in her eyes betrayed her. "Oh, Casey? He's just a friend from class. You know how studying can get." There it was, the slight stutter in her tone and the way she looked away. My heart sank. I had to say something, confront her lies head on, but the thought of doing so felt like stepping into a minefield. I convinced myself to keep watching, to gather more evidence for Caleb. Days turned into weeks, and the sense of dread grew heavier, my conscience pulling me in two conflicting directions, one saying to protect my brother and the other warning me to respect Jess's space, the fragile veneer of our friendship hanging by a thread. Eventually, during a family dinner, I found myself sitting across from Jess, her laughter blending into the warm melodies of my parents' bantering. It highlighted the dissonance I felt, like a sour note in an otherwise pleasant song. Caleb nudged my elbow, an innocent gesture that echoed loudly in my mind, reminding me of the precarious balance I had to maintain. The moment finally arrived when Jess excused herself from the table to take a phone call outside. My brother watched her retreating figure, a faint smile on his lips, but I couldn't match his joviality. It was time to take a stand. I turned to him, my pulse racing, and said, "Hey, Caleb, can I talk to you for a second?" I dragged him to the quiet of the hallway, the soft hum of family chatter fading into the background. "I think Jess might be lying to you," I blurted out, my words tumbling over each other, fueled by relentless guilt and desperation. His expression shifted from casual to concerned, then to pained disbelief. "What do you mean?" he whispered, the weight of my accusation hanging in the air like a storm cloud. I hesitated, wrestling with my conscience, but the evidence amassed within me finally burst forth. I recounted my findings, how Jess's demeanor shifted, the text that felt all too personal, the way she avoided the topic when prompted. Caleb's face blanched, his mouth went dry as he processed my words. I immediately saw the doubt sketched across his face, the whipsaw of emotions flashing in his eyes, from denial to anger and finally to the cold, hard truth that lay just beneath the surface. Jess returned just in time to witness the storm brewing between the two of us. The atmosphere shifted palpably, and often the truth is that you don't need a hurricane to reveal how stormy the waters are underneath. A single ripple can cause the greatest waves. When she cornered us, she could sense the tension, her smile faltering, and in that moment, I felt the breath of regret freeze in my throat. The confrontation was swift and brutal, Jess unraveling before us like a fragile thread, her words spiraling into a defensive and contradictory mess. It had taken everything in me to voice the truth, but in the end, I merely felt hollow as Caleb grappled with the aftermath of my revelation. Jess defended her actions as innocent until proven guilty, caught in a lie but refusing to completely break down. Each attempt she made to regain his trust slipped further away, like sand through her fingers. When Caleb asked her about Casey, I could see hope fading in his eyes, replaced with an aching sense of betrayal. By the end of the night, Jess packed her things in a hurried, panicked frenzy, slamming the door of our home behind her, leaving a void that felt impossible to fill with laughter and light. It struck me how quickly a story could change, how slipping revelations could reshape not just lives but the very spaces they inhabited. Weeks passed, and the echoes of that confrontation lingered. Caleb and I lived amidst the silence of grieving for what was lost, both of us tiptoeing through the wreckage of a relationship that once felt solid and true. I thought I had captured a villain in Jess, yet I found myself in an unintended duel with my own integrity and the bonds of brotherhood. Conversations with Caleb were shorter, occasionally punctuated by awkward silences that left both of us feeling raw and exposed. I began to wonder if I had overstepped, if my loyalties to my brother had come at the cost of a friendship that might have merely needed a bit of time and honesty. It was a dangerous game to play, caught between being the good sibling and the potential destroyer of dreams. Yet, as my brother began to heal, slowly piecing together his heart, I learned that sometimes the hardest truths have to emerge to clear the air, no matter how painful. Caleb found solace in time spent with friends, rebuilding his foundation and exploring new paths, while Jess became a memory too volatile to unpack right now. Months later, as winter settled in, snow blanketing our world in peace, I found myself reflecting on that chaotic time. Unexpectedly, I received a text from Jess, nothing substantial, just an apology. It carried the weight of her unburdened heart, a message of acknowledgement that seemed to hum with a quiet sincerity. I was wrong, Caleb deserves better, and I am sorry for everything. My chest tightened as I contemplated sending it to him. Would he even want to know? Would it open old wounds? In that moment, I realized that life's intertwined paths shape our journey, they twist and turn through relationships in ways we can't always foresee. Perhaps the conclusion lay in forgiveness, not just for Jess, but for me too, for flawing as we all do. With time, the shadows receded, and emotions transformed into memories, leaving us both a little more tender but a lot more resilient. Life continues to curve into unforeseen directions, but I cherish the lesson of honesty in relationships, the quiet understanding that sometimes being someone else's support means asking the hard questions, even if it feels like you're lost amidst the whispers of doubt. And that is where, stripped back to the essence of our shared humanity, we all linger, between mistakes and redemption, in the heart of being imperfectly human. As I reflect on how my journey unfolded, I can't help but recall all the little moments that led me to that fateful encounter with my brother's girlfriend. It had begun as a regular Saturday afternoon, sun-dappled and lazy, the kind where time felt infinite. I was tidying my small apartment, putting on a podcast that spiraled from true crime stories into the endless chatter of Reddit threads, a guilty pleasure I often indulged in while organizing my life. Somewhere in the background, the hosts debated a post titled "A Myth Asshole for Ruining My Brother's Relationship." The words lingered in the air, resonating with my own bubbling thoughts. You see, my brother, Evan, had been dating Mia for nearly a year. At first glance, they seemed perfect for each other, their laughter echoing through family dinners. But as the months slinked by, little discrepancies began to prick at my intuition. I'd catch Mia giving evasive answers during simple conversations. If Evan asked her something seemingly innocent, she'd quickly change the subject or brush it off with a laugh that felt too forced. My protective instincts kicked in, and the more I observed, the more my unease mounted. One evening, I invited them over for dinner, eager to get a deeper glimpse into their relationship. The three of us sat around the wooden dining table, the aromatic smell of baked chicken wafting through the room. As Evan poured glasses of wine, I caught Mia's eyes darting toward her phone like a trapped bird seeking freedom. I tried to pull her into the conversation with stories of our childhood, hoping to bring a nostalgic warmth to the air. Yet, when I mentioned the time Evan tore his favorite t-shirt at the annual family picnic, I saw her brow furrow ever so slightly, and my stomach dropped. It seemed, in that fleeting moment, she had no idea what I was talking about. Intrigued, I pressed on, casually bringing up old family tales, noticing how her smile became increasingly strained. By dessert, she seemed little more than a perfect stranger sitting at my table. The evening wore on, laughter fading into polite smiles, and as the last plate was cleared, Mia excused herself. I was left with Evan, who looked so content, unaware of the unease that had tightened around my chest. I found myself grappling with a moral quandary. Did I bring it all up and risk ruining his happiness? Or did I quietly dismiss the nagging doubts festering inside me? Days turned into weeks, and the lingering doubt settled into my routine like a heavy quilt, suffocating and uncomfortable. I couldn't shake the thought that something wasn't right. Then I stumbled upon a post from a mutual friend on social media, a photo captioned with a location that made my heart race. Mia had claimed to be out with friends that day, but the photograph clearly showed her at a local cafe with someone I didn't recognize, a man, laughing and leaning in closer than friends should. That gut instinct ignited like a wildfire. I felt I owed it to Evan to confront Mia. The next Sunday, I was thrust into the role of an unwitting detective. I invited Mia over under the guise of wanting to hang out, my heart pounding as I collected my thoughts, preparing for what would unfold. We sipped tea in casual silence until the air thickened. I casually mentioned the photograph. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly, and I could feel every nerve ending in my body come alive with tension. "Oh, that was just a friend from college," she blurted, and I saw in her demeanor what I had feared, a slip, an inflection that rang hollow. "We were just catching up." It would have been simple to drop it there, to dismiss the sick feeling pooling in my gut, but something inside me made me push further. The moment stretched as we talked, dissecting her explanations, and with each feeble justification, her facade began to fray. I found myself caught in an emotional tempest, feeling as if I were standing on the precipice of betrayal from my brother, knowing full well that the truth I sought could lead to devastating consequences. In the end, my apprehension dissipated when Mia confessed, her voice shook, sincerity washing over her. "I didn't want to hurt Evan," she said, tears brimming. "But I felt trapped in our relationship. There's someone else, yes, I've been seeing him, and I thought if I avoided betrayal by lying, it wouldn't hurt him as much." There it was, raw and exposed. She had caught herself in the web of a lie, and the weight of it pressed hard against my chest. I now had the burden of this knowledge not only for myself but for Evan. When I eventually shared everything with him, I felt that peculiar mix of resolve and heartbreak, knowing the path forward was strewn with strife but also clarity. As he processed the news, I felt empathy anchoring me amidst the unfolding chaos. That day would mark the beginning of a slow healing for Evan, a journey filled with tears, and reassessment that eventually led to closure, but more importantly, a chance for him to reclaim his narrative. Reflecting on those events still evokes a cocktail of emotions within me, grief, anger, and ultimately, relief that truth settled in like a balm. Time would teach us lessons, and while I wrestle with the aftermath of having disrupted their lives, I hold on to one clear takeaway: love thrives on trust and honesty. Even as the shadows of uncertainty loom, I am thankful for the light that chased them away, reminding me of the importance of integrity in our ties. And poignantly, I found myself nestled within the web of imperfect humanity, each thread a testament to the resilience of our hearts. This is where I linger now, at the crossroads of relationships and honesty, learning to navigate my own role within life's beautiful, complex tapestry. As I stand at this crossroads, the days slowly unravel, each bringing its own share of contemplation and dialogue, not only with the people around me but also within the quiet corners of my mind. The initial chaos that my actions set in motion has settled into something softer, more contemplative, akin to the lingering echoes of a storm that has passed, leaving only the calm light of dusk in its wake. I find myself revisiting the conversations I had with my brother, Ethan, and Jess, the woman he was dating. She has since become a stranger, not for lack of connection but for the intricacies that emerged when the truth shattered the slightly gleaming facade we had shared. Every time I reminisce about that night, I remember the gentle hum of the ceiling fan above me, casting playful shadows on our faces as we sat around the dining table, the remnants of takeout strewn, forgotten, a faint aroma of spice lingering in the air. It was supposed to be an ordinary get-together, one of those fond reunions where laughter and teasing flew as easily and freely as the drinks. In hindsight, I understand it was those very moments that held the seeds of discontent, edged with secrets and suppressed whispers. The evening turned when I casually mentioned a conversation I had overheard a few weeks prior, settling into the comfort of familiarity. I didn't intend to spark anything dangerous, but when Jess's gaze faltered, a flicker of tension darting across her face, I recognized a vulnerability hidden beneath her polished exterior. I could feel it in my bones, something was off, as if I had stumbled onto an unseen fault line between friendship and honesty. My words became a mirror reflecting back not only her reaction but also the complexity of each of our lives that felt so simply woven together at first glance. The once warm smiles turned brittle as I sensed uncharted territory emerge, and my heart raced in response, caught in the thrall of worry and confusion. Was I the villain here? How had these simple words unleashed a storm I had barely understood? In the aftermath, Ethan's hurt echoed through the walls of our shared memories, changing their texture, creating waves that rippled through every interaction, leaving me grappling with my own lingering guilt. I had unintentionally stripped away the safety of their shared world, and for that moment, the world felt heavy with uncertainty, casting shadows that felt almost unbearably long. Yet, as time unfurled, I witnessed them begin to untangle their own narrative, seeking solace in honesty that transcended the initial hurt. Watching from a distance, I felt a shift. Ethan, brave and resilient, began to reclaim his agency, powerfully confronting the threads that had sought to bind him in silence. Jess, caught amidst the chaos, sought forgiveness and healing. Her armor had cracked, revealing vulnerabilities that she had hidden even from herself. It was beautiful, and painfully raw, to see two people who loved each other engage in this intricate dance of possibility and renewal. As for me, my perspective widened, becoming a reflective pool where I realized that love is not merely an idealistic construct but a battleground where truths and lies intertwine, a place where both light and shadow dwell. I became a witness to their vulnerability, harboring an understanding that while I had played a part in unearthing the lie that had woven through their relationship, the journey towards honesty was one they had to undertake themselves. I learned that the path to healing is never straight but often obscured by the fog of fear and hesitation, yet it held the promise of growth and restoration. Now, as I sit alone in quiet reflection, the air filled with the soft rustle of leaves outside my window, I understand the importance of navigating these murky waters. I've come to acknowledge that it is often the remnants of past mistakes that can lead us into brighter tomorrows, as we strike a delicate balance between holding on and letting go. Savoring the bittersweet experiences leads us to a deeper communion with our humanity, revealing that perhaps, in the end, we are defined not by our flaws but by our resilience in overcoming them. As I ponder this, I remind myself that even amidst uncertainty, love, raw, honest, and sometimes painful, thrives through the knowledge that we will stumble, yet in our stumbling lies the chance to rise anew. Here, nestled firmly in the fabric of our entwined lives, I find solace, realizing that the heartbeat of humanity, fraught with misunderstanding yet rich in love, will continue to guide us through the ever-evolving journey of connection. I never expected my career as a mental health therapist would introduce me to something so unsettling, something so beyond my understanding that it would leave an indelible mark on my life. I've spent years working in various clinics, hearing people pour out their fears, anxieties, and traumas, yet I never prepared myself for the day I would meet Drew, my new patient who quite literally lived in a basement. It started on a cloudy Tuesday, just a typical day at the office, when I received an unexpected referral to see a patient in dire need. The organization informed me that the new patient was a young man in his late 20s, living at his parents' house, but the caveat here was that he had taken residence in their damp, dark basement. Perhaps I sensed the curiosity mingling with apprehension as I entered that basement for the first time, descending the rickety stairs under the dim light fixture that flickered ominously. When I first laid eyes on Drew, sitting curled up in the worn armchair littered with mismatched blankets and half-finished novels, he didn't seem out of place at all. He looked like one of those characters, deeply intriguing, yet profoundly damaged. As we started our sessions, I learned more about him. His voice was soft yet unwavering, full of wisdom that belied his years. Drew revealed he was an aspiring writer, but his creativity was stifled not only by his crippling anxiety but a family history riddled with mental health struggles that seemed to hover over him like a thick fog. The reason he confined himself to the basement was twofold. 1, he felt safer from his overbearing parents, and 2, it had become a sanctuary where he could tiptoe along the fragile line between reality and his vivid imagination. Slowly, week after week, he unspooled the terrible tapestry of his life, and with every session, I felt more connected to him. I, too, grappled with a blend of empathy and unease, wondering if I was genuinely offering him the help he needed or simply peering into a disquieting parallel of my own existence. His stories had begun to weave themselves into my mind, and a mysterious bond developed between us, shrouded in mutual vulnerability and unspoken truths. In my gut, though, a nagging doubt began to creep in. Had I crossed an unspoken line? The basement was replete with shadows that twisted and turned in an unsettling dance, and as I opened the door to leave every session, I felt as if I was stepping into a realm that was both captivating and deeply forbidding. One week, as Drew recounted a particularly harrowing tale about a character of his creation that mirrored his struggles, his energy shifted. There was something in his eyes then, a flicker, maybe of madness or sheer genius, it was hard to tell. I found myself holding my breath, sensing that I had stumbled into a fracture of his soul I wasn't fully prepared for. He mentioned a night he felt compelled to protect himself, drawn into a world where he blurred the lines between fiction and reality. He spoke of the basement in such vivid detail that I almost believed it concealed a world of its own. The conversation lingered like an echo in my mind, unsettling and captivating, and as we closed our session, he handed me a yellowed piece of paper filled with scrawled notes and sketches. "It's a character chart for my next story," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "But it's more than that, it's about me." I felt like a voyeur peering at the fragile flaps of his psyche exposed, and I saw visions of that basement, full of shadows, solace, and maybe something sinister, a vessel for both creativity and torment. In the days that followed, I found myself lost in thought about the stories he told and the meanings hidden beneath his words. One rainy evening, driven by impulse, I decided to venture to his home once more, convinced to understand the space that shaped Drew. As I approached the house, its haunted facade loomed in the dim light, the cracks in the walls seemed to mirror the fractures within the man I had been trying to help. I knocked nervously, and his mother opened the door with a distant look in her eyes, as if too lost in her own thoughts to notice my presence. She led me down to the basement without a word, and once again, I was swept into that dim world filled with shadows and silence. Drew was seated exactly where I'd last seen him, yet there was an air of something different, a thick silence that hung between us like a taut string about to break. He offered me the chair, but I hesitated, suddenly aware that the weight of the room had shifted. "How did you even know to come here?" he asked, his tone low, almost cautious. I explained my worry, my need to understand him better, but the moment my voice faltered, I felt the unease ripple through the space. Something was wrong. That paper he'd handed me was not merely character sketches, they were intricate maps, ones I had overlooked. I leaned closer, trying to absorb every detail, my heart racing as I realized they depicted not just his stories but a labyrinth that mirrored his mind, a prison where his fears came to life. "Drew," I began, my voice quaking, "is there something else you need to share?" He looked up then, his eyes wide as if a veil had been lifted, revealing something buried deep. "I was trying to escape it," he confessed, his hand shaking slightly. "The basement, my mind, it's all the same." And there it was, the roots of his anxiety twisted into the mere act of climbing stairs, as if the very act of going beyond those four walls would unravel the stories he encapsulated. The moment we stood there, surrounded by the artifacts of his life, I realized I was standing at the precipice of something profound. I couldn't help but feel that we had both stepped into a world where compassion danced with darkness, where understanding intertwined with fear. I left that night, my mind racing with thoughts of our conversation, infuriated with myself. I had come seeking answers but found more questions, knots of confusion wrapping deeper around my heart. In the weeks that followed, our sessions transformed. I learned as much from him as he from me. I began to see that the basement was not just a physical space but a realm for healing, a canvas for his creativity and his pain, pushing me deeper into my own fears about boundaries and the nature of care. As I continued to support him in constructing bridges back to the wider world, I realized that sometimes from the deepest shadows, creativity can bloom. What initially seemed a prison became a place of liberation in Drew's mind. Drew eventually moved out of that basement, transitioning into his own apartment, but he never fully left that space behind. Occasionally, I find a bolt of vivid inspiration in his stories. They resonate in me like echoes of a song forgotten. The basement was an invitation to ponder how darkness and light can coalesce, shaping our narratives in ways we might never anticipate. Months later, I returned for one last session, filled with pride and bittersweet nostalgia. As we closed the door behind us, I realized we had woven a tapestry of healing from the threads of his fears. Drew offered me a handwritten letter before I left, expressing thanks that resonated with the warmth shared in those moments, leaving me with a heart full of wonder for the stories that define us. I don't know if I'll ever truly untangle the threads of our journey, but maybe, just maybe, those tales will continue to twist and turn through the shadows, guiding others home. The basement may have held its secrets, but our shared journey had birthed an unexpected friendship, reminding me that healing often blooms in the unlikeliest of places. And as I walked away, I felt an odd sense of closure, both for him and for myself, marveling at how connections can shift the boundaries of understanding. Somehow, through all the chaos, a sense of hope emerged. Life moves forward, often in the quietest of ways, from the shadows of our deepest fears. As I stepped out of that dimly lit basement for the last time, the scent of damp earth and stale memories clung to my clothes, a reminder of all that had transpired within the confines of those four walls. The late afternoon sun poured down, warm and inviting, contrasting sharply with the chill of the basement I'd just emerged from. It felt surreal, leaving behind a world that had unfolded so intricately, yet contained within such a compact space. I glanced back at the windowless facade, wondering how many secrets it still held, and how many more stories could be carved from its shadowy existence. My mind drifted to Jacob, the patient who had inadvertently become my confidant, revealing pieces of himself that seemed more like fragments of a puzzle than complete thoughts. Every session had brought its own revelations, but it was during our last visit that I learned the most about him, not through his words, but through the silence that lingered between us. In that silence, I realized the burden he carried. It wasn't merely the shame of his living conditions or the burden of his past that weighed him down, but the profound loneliness that accompanied his struggle. We had both used therapy to weave a thread of understanding, but perhaps it was more than that. It had become our lifeline in a stormy sea of isolation. It was that very humanity that connected us, more genuine than any scripted psychobabble. Even after our sessions ended, his voice echoed in my thoughts, especially his final words, which felt like both a closure and an invitation. "We're all just stories waiting to be told," he had said, a slight smile breaking the heavy gravity of his usual demeanor. I had left him with an assurance that he would never be alone again in this, that I would carry his story with me, sharing it in my own therapeutic journey. The ride home was filled with a medley of emotions swirling in my chest. I drove through the streets, watching life unfold in front of me, a chaotic dance that seemed so vibrant compared to the stillness I had just left behind. Children rode their bicycles, adults chatted idly on sidewalks, and the sun dipped lower on the horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of orange and pink. It struck me that everyone carried their own hidden struggles, akin to Jacob's. I could see snippets of their own stories passing by. The thought made me reflect on the inevitability of connection and how lives intertwine, often without first realizing our shared burdens. Late that evening, after a simple dinner of takeout sushi, I found myself drawn to my journal, compelled to somehow capture the essence of Jacob's journey. As I scribbled, I felt the weight of each word, the importance of preserving both his vulnerability and strength. I wrote about the laughter we shared, how he revealed fragments of his past in the safety of our sessions, the way he cracked jokes about his ex-girlfriends who lived in the realm of his memories, and how he took each poke of humor as a sliver to cut through his despair. With every stroke of the pen, I felt a release. I was processing his story while weaving it with my own appreciation for the resilience of the human spirit. In the weeks that followed, I kept Jacob in my thoughts more than I had anticipated. Each day seemed to bring a new layer to my understanding of what it meant to acknowledge someone's struggles and how much healing could stem from this acknowledgement. I had begun to reach out, sharing snippets of his journey at professional gatherings, using his anonymity wisely but ensuring his message was clear. Sometimes, hope is found in the most unexpected places, I would say, letting my colleagues know that each patient holds a labyrinth of experiences waiting to be navigated. As I moved through the rhythms of my life, the moments of doubt and worry echoed the earlier feelings of uncertainty I'd felt before meeting Jacob. It made me wonder if I was truly helping others in my practice, or merely dancing around the fringes of healing. But every time I remembered Jacob's laugh, that clear, light laugh that echoed in the depths of despair, I knew then that every patient had their own story, a narrative that deserved to be heard and, at times, passed forward. And so, I learned to walk with a lighter heart, carrying Jacob's strength alongside my professional insights. It was a role we both had unknowingly embraced. I was his watcher and he was my guide. As the boundaries blurred, I realized that each connection I made afterward felt richer, more vibrant, echoing the lessons I had learned in that basement. Months passed, and while I never stopped checking in on him, the visits dwindled. His progress had become a blossoming journey of his own. One evening, just as the winter frost began to settle in, I received a message from him. It was a simple image, a photo of himself standing outside a brightened door, grinning into the camera. "I got a place above ground," it read, "just a tiny studio with a view of the stars." In that moment, my heart soared with pride. Perhaps the stories held within our shadows weren't meant to disappear, after all. Instead, they became guides, reminding us that, together, we could traverse even the darkest of paths, eventually finding the light. The days that followed that heartfelt message felt lighter, almost as if the chill of winter was merely a backdrop to the warmth blossoming within me. As a therapist, I'd always known that change was possible, but witnessing it firsthand in someone so close to the edge of despair was different. It was invigorating, a testament to the human spirit's resilience. Encouraged by his message, I found myself reflecting on our sessions together, how his quiet determination had sparked something deep within me. He'd shared stories of his past, his childhood and dreams, woven with threads of despair that had once held him captive in that dim basement. Yet somehow, he had begun to untangle those knots, seeking a life beyond the confines of the life he'd constructed. I wanted to see him thrive in his new world, to bask in the glow of his hard-fought freedom. I put aside my research for the day, eager to reach out and arrange a visit. When the day finally came, I felt an unusual mixture of excitement and nervousness, a tangible thrill coursing through my veins as I rang the doorbell of his new place. The tiny studio indeed had a view of the stars, twinkling brilliantly against the velvet night sky, and it felt miraculous to stand in this space that smelled faintly of fresh paint and new beginnings. When he opened the door, the joy in his eyes mirrored the vastness above. "Welcome to my new chapter," he said, his voice steady, yet laced with an undercurrent of disbelief. We spent hours talking about his transition, the spooky stories he had filled our sessions with, and how he was learning to embrace both the light and dark within himself. The vulnerability we shared deepened our bond beautifully. I was no longer just his therapist but a friend, a confidant. As the night wore on, he took me to the small balcony where we could see the stars in all their glory. He pointed to one specific star that shone brighter than the others, calling it his milestone star, a symbol of his journey toward healing. I stood beside him, aware that my heart was expanding with every word we exchanged. It was during those moments of genuine connection, immersed in laughter and shared silence, that I realized how much his struggle had mirrored my own. As a therapist, I had also escaped the shadows, my own fears of inadequacy and the burden of expectations plaguing my mind. Being present with him allowed me to confront my own journey, helping me understand that healing happens collectively as much as it does individually. After what felt like both an eternity and a fleeting instant, the chill of the night crept in, and we both knew it was time for me to go. However, just before I left, he grabbed my arm gently. "Thank you," he whispered, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." I felt a lump in my throat but managed to smile, grateful for the role I had played in his transformation. As I headed home, I couldn't shake the feeling of euphoria lifting my spirits higher. I had walked with him through his shadows, and now, I looked forward to witnessing the glow of his newfound hope light up his world. Not long after, I received another message from him. "I feel like I can take on anything now," he shared, mixed with pictures of him smiling with new friends in a local cafe. I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming pride swell within me. But as the weeks unfolded, I realized that there was still a lot of work to be done, not on his part, but on mine. I began to understand that sharing my own struggles could help others, just as I had seen him blossoming without the constraints of his past fears. And as winter melted into a warmer spring, I started to pen my own stories, some connected to my journey as a therapist, others reflecting my personal challenges. I found an unexpected community online, and in sharing, I diminished the power of those shadows that often tried to creep back in. While he stepped into life above ground, I was taking my own journey into the light. Together, we became beacons of hope, finding solace in our shared vulnerabilities and kindness for each other's pain. As we continued to share updates, our conversations illuminated the understanding that healing didn't have a finish line. It was messy, complex, and defined by moments of triumph and despair, but embracing those moments in our lives could lead not just to personal growth, but also to connection. So, when I reflect back on that basement and the struggles that transpired, I now see it as a sacred ground, one that birthed friendship, understanding, and the profound realization that the stories we carry don't just belong to us, they are threads woven into the fabric of humanity itself, binding us in our shared experiences. And sometimes, just sometimes, they bring us the light we so desperately seek. I never thought a simple dinner would unravel the delicate web of my family's dynamics, but that's exactly what happened one fateful evening when my mom's boyfriend, Todd, crossed a line I thought was unimaginable. I've always taken pride in being the rational one in the family, calm, collected, and a fierce protector of the boundaries I believed should never be crossed. My mom had met Todd about 6 months prior, and while I was initially supportive, I gradually grew uneasy. Todd was charming in that way that feels forced, often masking what I couldn't quite place. My gut instinct screamed that his charisma was more a facade than anything genuine. On the night in question, dinner was supposed to be just pasta and garlic bread, a simple affair to celebrate my mom's birthday. The air was thick with the warmth of nostalgia as my mom smiled at the table, her cheeks glowing like the candles flickering nearby. I didn't understand the palpable tension until Todd made an offhand comment about my weight, something he couched in concern, but struck me like a lightning bolt. "You know, if you cut out carbs, you might feel a lot better," he said, chuckling lightly, looking directly at me as though he were giving wise, unsolicited advice. My fork clattered onto the plate as I momentarily lost my voice, the blood rushing to my ears muffling the light-hearted chatter of the other guests around us. I could see my mom's eyes widen with embarrassment and horror, yet her defensiveness seemed to evaporate in the air, as though she were mourning the loss of the good time rather than standing up for me. The tension wrapped around my throat like a noose, and as Todd continued to make jocular remarks about my youthful resilience, I felt my whole body flush with anger. I excused myself to the bathroom, but I didn't need the time to breathe, I needed an exit strategy. I found myself peering at my reflection and wondering why I wasn't capable of standing up for myself. I raced back to the table, determined to reclaim the narrative, ready to carve out a semblance of respect I thought Todd had stripped from me. I didn't know what sparked it, but I decided enough was enough. With my heart pounding, I tapped my glass to gather the attention of the room. "You can't speak to people like that and expect to be welcomed into this family," I stated, my voice surprisingly steady despite the turmoil inside me. The air crackled with disbelief and silence engulfed us. Todd's eyes narrowed, and for a split second, I saw anger flicker across his face, but before he could retort, my mother intervened. "There's no need for this," she trailed off weakly, her gaze darting between Todd and me. Maybe we should just relax? It's my birthday, after all." But I could feel my resolve solidifying, a growing realization that I wasn't fighting just for myself anymore, I was fighting for my mom, too. The weight of the evening hung heavily in the air, and I finally spoke with clarity. "Hey, Todd, if you can't treat me or anyone here with respect, you should leave." Time held its breath before a stunned silence shattered, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, caught off guard. My mom didn't say a word, she just looked at me, a mix of pride and concern dancing across her features, but all I could feel was an overwhelming sense of satisfaction and relief. To my surprise, Todd stood up, muttered something under his breath describing my decision as childish and immature, and stormed out. The air felt lighter in his absence, and though my mom seemed torn, I knew I had crossed a bridge that would change the contours of our family forever. The aftermath was full of raw emotions. My mom and I had long talks about what it meant to be supportive versus enabling, and while our relationship became a tapestry filled with unresolved threads, it also blossomed into something more honest. I learned that being an adult sometimes means cultivating boundaries even with the ones we love. I found my bravery in vulnerability, and it felt exhilarating. Looking back, I often wonder if I truly was the asshole for kicking him out or if he was the one posing as family. I can't say for sure, but I do know that intervening in that moment set the stage for a more authentic partnership between my mom and me, where both of us could feel safe in expressing our truths, unfiltered and free from the poison of unrealistic expectations. Months later, after the dust finally settled, I discovered my mom and I were navigating life together more openly. I realized an unexpected truth: standing up for myself meant standing up for her, too. As for Todd, he became a fleeting shadow of our past, often discussed but never missed, an echo of lessons learned in the most trying of circumstances. In the end, perhaps my query of AITA has more to do with growth than judgment, and I think we both needed that moment more than we realized. Months flowed into each other in a way that felt almost dreamlike, with each moment teaching us something profound and bittersweet about ourselves and the bonds we shared. The initial sting of uncertainty I had felt after kicking Todd out of our home faded into something softer, a gentle reminder of resilience. My relationship with my mom morphed into something I never thought possible. It was as if we had cracked open a door that had long been shut, revealing an entire room of possibilities. My mornings were no longer engulfed in tension. Waking up to a quiet house felt safe, familiar, and comforting. We developed a routine that involved long cups of coffee shared and the soft sunlight streaming through the kitchen window, mornings filled with laughter over half-baked plans for the day. Sometimes we'd simply sit in silence, and the warmth of companionship filled any gaps that words left behind. Each weekend became an opportunity for bonding. We would embark on spontaneous trips to the nearby farmer's market or spend lazy afternoons browsing through old bookstores, laughing over battered copies of novels we never intended to read but always found irresistible. We were healing together, and it became apparent that standing up to Todd had ignited a spark in both of us, encouraging vulnerability and strength in equal measure. During one particularly sunny afternoon, as we nestled into our favorite corner of the local cafe, my mom gently broached the subject of dating again, her cheeks faintly flushed with uncertainty. I felt a wave of protectiveness wash over me. Todd had left his mark on our lives, but I didn't want to let that shadow stay. She spoke of wanting companionship, the simple joys of sharing a meal with someone who wasn't mired in the complexities of past heartaches. I let her words settle within me, recognizing the importance of her desires. It was a reflection of rebirth, not only for her but for both of us. I could hear in her voice a note of hope, one that was contagious. So, I encouraged her to dip her toes back into the dating pool, enjoying the romantic rides of life instead of cowering in fear of what might come. Those discussions led to other confessions, revealing our dreams, our fears, and the haunted remnants of our shared history, including how Todd had twisted us in knots of guilt and control. However, it wasn't all perfect, of course. There were moments when uncomfortable truths reared their heads, like the time my mom had mentioned she ran into Todd at the grocery store, and my stomach had churned at the mere thought. Memories could be both heavy and light, and navigating them felt akin to walking a tightrope, balancing the urge to protect her and allowing her the freedom to forge her own path. We managed the anxiety that brewed between us with deep conversations, ensuring that our newfound bond didn't fall prey to the traditional parent-child roles of expectation but grew into something fluid and mutual instead. As time rolled on, Todd's presence became less of an open wound and more of a distant memory, salted yet healing. Discussing him now felt more like reminiscing about an old storm than grappling with its aftermath. Looking back, the confusion had morphed into clarity, the kind that made it easy to breathe again. I realized that the question of whether I was the asshole was as intricate and layered as the relationships we nurture. It had never been about placing blame but rather about making choices that resonate with the essence of who we are becoming. I pondered long and hard about how far we had come since that chaotic moment of clarity. Each step we took towards understanding ourselves was a flower blooming in the light of truth. Perhaps the most remarkable evolution was when my mom unexpectedly invited me to her first date with someone she'd met through a mutual friend. The invitation was bittersweet, a full-circle moment that mirrored all we had built together. I watched her prepare with a mixture of excitement and apprehension, carefully selecting an outfit that reflected both her newfound spirit and careful consideration. And as she left that evening, confidence in her step and an infectious smile on her face, I felt a swell of pride so potent it nearly overwhelmed me. I wasn't just standing up for her but also encouraging her to stand tall for herself. In the quiet of our home that night, I found comfort in knowing that we could support each other, no longer confined by shadows, but instead illuminated by honest growth. As I climbed into bed, I thought about that question, am I the asshole? And smiled softly to myself. We were human, we stumbled and learned, and through it all, we had found a vibrant thread of connection that knitted us together despite the chaos that tried to pull us apart. As dreams began to weave their way into my consciousness, I felt a whisper of contentment guiding me gently to sleep, surrounded by the soft glow of hope for both our futures. The days that followed felt unusually bright, a stark contrast to the cloud of unease that had loomed over our lives since Todd entered the picture. I could see it in my mom's eyes, a flicker of renewed spirit coursing through her as she began to rediscover parts of herself previously buried beneath layers of obligation and disappointment. We started sharing more, little moments turned into deep conversations, brunches turned into full-day adventures. One Saturday, we ventured to our favorite spot by the lake, a place that had been a backdrop for both cherished memories and silent tensions. As we sat by the water, the sun casting shimmering reflections across the surface, I felt a warmth growing inside my chest. Remember when we used to come here every summer? You always said the ducks could talk if you listened closely enough, I said, a playful glint in my eye. My mom laughed, a joyous sound that felt freeing. I think they've got a lot to say, she replied, especially about that Todd character. The laughter that erupted between us was like a balm, soothing wounds I hadn't realized still existed. Yet, as much as we were improving, there were moments when the past would come crashing back like waves against the shore. I would occasionally catch flashes of sorrow in her expression, remnants of guilt or perhaps loss, when she glanced at an old photograph of our family that hadn't been put away yet. One evening, while we were organizing some boxes in the attic, I found an old journal of hers, filled with entries that painted a portrait of her life before Todd, before her loneliness manifested in desperation. I delicately placed it in front of her and said, "This seems like a memory worth revisiting." She hesitated, eyes darting across the weathered pages, then opened it slowly, scanning the lines like reliving a dream. I watched the myriad of emotions wash over her face, nostalgia, longing, sadness, but ultimately an understanding. It was a journey through her past that we both needed. As the weeks turned into months, and our relationship learned to navigate uncharted waters, I still found moments of uncertainty. I sometimes wondered if kicking Todd out had been the right thing, lingering thoughts tugging at my conscience in the quiet of the night. Would I regret the choices I made? Or would that fissure have been filled with resentment had I chosen silence? When these thoughts crept in, I would remind myself, as I often did, of the strength we were building together. It wasn't just about removing a person from our lives, it was about regaining ownership of who we were and what we wanted for ourselves. In those quiet nights, as I ruminated on my feelings, I realized how much I had grown through this experience. No longer was I a bystander in my own life, but instead, I was a participant, fully engaged and aware. One crisp autumn evening, as I sat at my desk journaling, I noticed my mom standing at the hallway, hesitating as if she were unsure whether to join me or stay in her own thoughts. I looked up, and when our eyes met, I beckoned her over, encouraging without words. She shuffled over, holding a steaming cup of tea, which she offered with a gentle smile. "I've been thinking," she said, and I could hear the tremor in her voice, "about how I've let fear dictate so much of my life, how I let fear tie me to the wrong people." I nodded, encouraging her to continue. "It's time to not just stand up for myself, but to keep actively moving forward. I want to try to embrace more of this life, and I want, even need, you with me on this journey." The sincerity in her words washed over me like a refreshing wave, grounding and real. We dove into an evening of plans and dreams, mapping out what our future could look like beyond the realm of past shadows. We discussed hobbies we had put aside, travels we had always dreamed of, and the importance of forging new connections, both inside and outside our family. As months slipped by, I couldn't help but remember that defining moment when everything began to shift, the pivotal decision that nudged us both out of stagnation and into a new dawn. Our bond became a tapestry woven with both laughter and tears, both the shadows of previous pain and the bright threads of hope. In this space, I found myself gently answering my lingering question every time it fluttered through my mind. Nah, I wasn't the asshole after all. I was simply a person learning how to live authentically alongside another. As I finally drifted off to sleep that night, with thoughts of future adventures suspended in my mind, I felt lighter, anchored not by guilt or fear of judgment, but by an unshakable belief in growth and connection. My dreams took flight with vivid images of laughter and sunlight, creating a canvas of what was to come, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a serene sense of anticipation unfurl within me, a sweet promise of tomorrow and all the possibilities it would bring. It was one of those mundane evenings that seemed endless, marked by the soft glow of my laptop screen illuminating my small, cluttered apartment. Like many of us do these days, I found myself scrolling through social media, half paying attention to the world around me. I had recently moved back to my hometown after college, trying to settle into a routine that felt both familiar and painfully dull. I wasn't particularly in touch with my old friends anymore, but every now and then, I would receive a random friend request or notification from them, invoking fond memories and a tinge of nostalgia. That evening, however, the mundane spiraled into the unexpected as I stumbled onto something I wish I hadn't. While sifting through my usual lineup of memes and pet videos, I came across a post from Jordan, my old high school friend. He had shared a link that, out of sheer curiosity, I clicked on. That's when I was greeted with a highly explicit video, featuring none other than him. My heart jumped, I could hardly process what I was seeing. The shock wasn't just in the content itself, it was the raw surrealism of seeing someone I grew up with in such an intimate and revealing situation, a stark contrast to the goofy teenager I remembered. I felt that disorienting blend of disbelief and uncomfortable intrigue, my brain racing through the implications. How did this happen? Did he know it was out there? I spent the next few days wrapped in a haze of confusion and guilt. I often wondered whether I should reach out to Jordan, but the fear of crossing a line haunted me. What would I even say? "Hey, I found your video online?" The words felt ridiculous and invasive. I kept telling myself that maybe it was just a fluke of the internet, and that I should let it go, but every time I scrolled past his social media profiles, I felt a pang of disturbance, as if our past friendship was tainted by this unintended discovery. The thought spiraled in my mind, was he okay? Was anyone else aware of this? Was it being shared? I waded through the murky waters of my emotions. I didn't want to objectify him or reduce him to a single, damaging narrative, but I couldn't shake my anxiety about whether he was aware of what was happening behind the scenes of his online persona. After wrestling with myself for a week, I finally found the courage to send him a message, accompanied by a deep breath and the sincerity of a friend. I typed and retyped my words, carefully choosing my tone, desperate to tread lightly. "Hey, I know this might sound weird, but I came across something online and I wanted to check in with you." When he responded, it took me completely by surprise. At first, there was a simple, bemused acknowledgement of my message, but then his tone shifted. Yeah, I guess it's out there. I thought I could trust that guy with my private videos, but turns out that wasn't the smartest decision. Reading his words, I felt a wave of empathy wash over me. There was no anger or embarrassment in his reply, just a resigned acceptance of the mishap, an acknowledgement of his choices, the nature of trust and intimacy in this digital age. It felt like a weight lifted, an opening for genuine conversation, as we ended up chatting late into the night, reminiscing about school days while skirting around the awkwardness that had initially bridged us together. With every message exchanged, I realized how important it was to extend our understanding to one another, to let each other live beyond the confines of our past selves, and come to terms with our humanity, flaws and all. As days turned into weeks, Jordan and I gradually rebuilt our friendship. He shared more about his experience, how the moment had taught him to be more careful with his choices online. I admired his resilience, how he embraced this new reality instead of hiding from it. It became clear that the incident, while unfortunate, had led to a deeper understanding of trust and vulnerability in relationships, guiding both of us into a more profound and honest connection with each other. Eventually, that unexpected thread that had linked the two of us, so fraught but necessary, loomed large, creating a bridge that carried us forward. In the end, I learned that sometimes shocking experiences can shake us into clarity, reminding us that life, with its highs and lows, is ultimately built on the connections we forge. As I closed my laptop that night, I carried with me a newfound appreciation for the intricacies of friendship, and the delicate balance between vulnerability and trust. Update: a few months later, Jordan launched a podcast where he shared his journey through self-acceptance and the complexities of personal identity in the digital age. I was honored to be one of his first guests, and that raw conversation turned into something both healing and empowering for us both. As I sat across from Jordan in that small, cozy recording studio, the walls adorned with vibrant artwork and a soft rug beneath our feet, the atmosphere was infused with a sense of purpose that transcended our initial fears. It was as if we were stepping onto a stage, but instead of an audience of strangers, we were merely two friends, each sharing pieces of ourselves we had once kept hidden. I watched as he adjusted the microphone, his brow furrowing in concentration while he recalled the uphill battle of self-acceptance. In that moment, I remembered the raw feeling that had surged within me when I stumbled upon his NSFW photos months earlier, how they had unraveled my world and spun it into a tangled web of confusion, admiration, and guilt. It had felt so surreal, and I scarcely imagined that we would come to share such a profound journey afterward. We dove deep into discussions about identity, not only his but also mine, finding solace in the confession of our experiences in a world that often felt too demanding. With each passing moment, the podcast transformed from a simple sharing of stories into a patchwork of vulnerability, where we challenged the notions of expectation and fear surrounding our identities. I spoke of my initial reaction to his photos, of feeling conflicted between admiration for his confidence and a strange betrayal of our friendship, and how I grappled with the realization that vulnerability could be a bridge rather than a divide. Jordan listened intently, his eyes lighting up as I described the turmoil of wanting to reach out and support him while also grappling with my own insecurities about my perceptions. The air was thick with honesty and connection, two elements that had previously felt so far removed. By the time we wrapped up the session, the sun had begun to set, casting a warm glow through the studio window that felt like a blessing on our shared vulnerability. We spent a moment in comfortable silence, reflecting on how this had become more than just a podcast episode. It was a turning point for both of us. That night, as I drifted off to sleep, I felt a wave of contentment wash over me. I realized that those experiences we endured, the unexpected discoveries and the moments of raw honesty, had transformed us into individuals who understood the nuanced dance of connection in an often fragmented world. There was an unspoken promise that despite the myriad of uncertainties life tosses our way, we would navigate the full spectrum of emotions together. The podcast episode aired 2 weeks later, and it was shared amongst our friends and family, leading to conversations we could have only dreamed of having before. Reactions varied, some were supportive, others cautious, but the thread of understanding was woven throughout, sparking a gentle dialogue about identity and acceptance. In the coming months, our friendship deepened, evolving into a safe space where we bared our hopes and fears without reservation. It became clear that our experiences were merely the starting points. Together, we explored deeper conversations about what it meant to express love and vulnerability in friendships, touching on the fears that kept people isolated and ashamed of their authentic selves. Jordan received messages from intrigued listeners who found strength in his story and our conversation, and I would sometimes smile at how far we had come from that initial moment of discomfort and confusion. Not long after, I decided to create a blog inspired by our discussions, focusing on mental well-being and the beauty of genuine connections. It was cathartic, and eventually, it blossomed into a platform for others to share their truths. As I wrapped up a thoughtful post late one night, reflecting on the delicate balance of trust and vulnerability, I glanced over at my notification feed to discover a message from one of my readers. It was a heartfelt letter from someone who identified with the struggles of acceptance and the fear of being judged, who thanked me for sharing my story. In that moment, I felt a comforting realization settle in. Our lives are often a mosaic crafted from our connections, our fears, our stories, and the way we choose to understand them. And as these exchanges trickled down the corridors of time, I felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing we were building something beyond ourselves, creating waves of understanding and acceptance for anyone who dared to share their journey. In the weeks that followed that moment, I found myself enveloped in an unforeseen sense of purpose. Writing was a refuge, a way to untangle the complexities of my thoughts while forging connections in a broader world. The glowing screen of my laptop became a portal not just for sharing my own experiences, but for inviting others into a dialogue. I began to receive letters not only from those grappling with their own identity but from a diverse tapestry of voices, friends, family, and even strangers, all reaching out in vulnerability. Each note was a thread weaving together a larger narrative of shared humanity, and with every message, I felt the weight of my previous fears begin to lift, like a fog that dissipates under warm sunlight. As Jordan's podcast gained traction, our conversations drew in an audience hungry for authenticity. He had a talent for cultivating a space where stories flowed freely, and I watched as people opened up about their own experiences, revealing the wounds they carried, the battles they fought in silence. Every episode was a reminder that we were not alone, that the threads of our lives were interconnected, even if we often felt like solitary travelers on our respective journeys. The therapeutic richness of our discussions resonated so powerfully that we considered live sessions, inviting our listeners to join in and share their stories, live and unfiltered. One evening, after a particularly moving episode, I laid on my couch, gazing at the ceiling, thoughts swirling in my mind. I remembered my own journey, the immense weight of fear I had endured when I unearthed Jordan's NSFW content. It had initially felt like a betrayal, a rupture in the fabric of our friendship. Yet, now, it appeared as merely a chapter in a broader narrative of growth, acceptance, and deeper understanding. As I turned those ideas over, I started to pen my thoughts, a reflection on how fear can isolate us but also push us toward clarity and connection. Weeks later, after I shared my reflections in one of our episodes, a woman named Mia reached out. She was searching for solace in a tumultuous sea of self-doubt after experiencing something deeply personal, a shocking revelation from her best friend who had suffered through similar battles of identity. Mia's note was laced with pain, courage, and a hint of hope, and as I read her words, my heart swelled with empathy. I felt a calling, a collective responsibility to channel our experiences into something constructive for others, to transform our authentic exchanges into healing touchstones. Eventually, we scheduled a collaborative session where Mia could join us on air, a chance to share her story with vulnerability. The three of us chatted before recording, and I could sense Mia's hesitation. What if no one understands? She shared, the tremor in her voice betraying her fears. In a reassuring tone, I replied, "That's the beauty of sharing. Even if just one person listens and feels seen, it's worth it." With the warmth of our shared energies wrapping around us, we pressed record, and Mia shared more than I could have hoped. Her authentic vulnerability inspired a flood of comments from listeners, people sharing their own experiences of love, loss, and the rawness of existence. After that episode, our community grew exponentially. Messages poured in, and together, we navigated through backstories of fear, courage, and redemption. Each tale felt like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, slowly creating a whole that was more vibrant than I could have imagined. Through these interactions, I learned that vulnerability weaves the strongest bonds, tying hearts together in a way superficial connections never could. Months later, during a live session that felt charged with energy and authenticity, I reflected on how far we'd come. I could hear the hushed whispers of other shared stories around me, an orchestra of human experiences blending into a comforting harmony. As we concluded, a listener's message popped up, someone thankful for the community we had fostered, expressing how the space made them feel seen for the first time in years. I shared that note aloud, feeling a lump forming in my throat. My heart brimmed with gratitude, a sense of belonging rising within me. This journey began with fear but transformed into something profound, an unabashed embracing of humanity's stories. As I closed my laptop that night, I understood that life is not merely a collection of moments but rather the bonds we forge amidst them, powerful connections that flourish in the soft glow of empathy. I felt a renewed sense of purpose. We were not just sharing stories anymore, we were nurturing a sanctuary where fears could be laid bare, acceptance could blossom, and every voice, even those hidden in the shadows, could resonate with truth. It was in this space that we truly found ourselves, each other, and the collective light we were meant to share.